we spent the last 3 years looking at why we're not building condos in Colorado generally. And we created an organization of which the Realtors were an active member called the Homeownership Opportunity Alliance, HOA. And the idea behind it was to find solutions to what 3 years ago we didn't really understand. Why weren't we building any condos in metropolitan Denver? At the end of the first year, we figured out it was the way in which the law was being interpreted by law firms representing HOAs who were dealing with construction defects that they couldn't resolve. The law was unique to condominiums. Similar remedies for single-family housing had been undertaken several years prior to that, along with apartments, which has its own unique ownership issues. But it was condominiums that were in an unusual place. Number one, typically when the property is handed over to a HOA by the developer, in that declaration, most of them says that if there's going to be any construction or any litigation engaged, it takes a two-thirds, or it takes the agreement between the developer and the HOA. And the vote, which requires roughly a two-thirds vote of the unit holders. The way that became interpreted back about in 2010 or so was that it really just took a two-thirds vote of the condo board, the HOA board in the condominium. So if someone had a problem with their unit and wanted to engage in class action litigation, they could successfully engage a court action with 3 to 5 people out of a board, depending whatever the number was. And by a sleight of hand, which nobody really could understand, is the ability of that board to pull that declaration, which required a two-thirds vote of the HOA board, out of the deck without talking to the developer or the builders. We seemed like it was just kind of an odd thing to do, obviously very much favoring certain folks who would be the beneficiaries of extended litigation, which was a small group of lawyers who have made that their desired outcome. We then started looking at what was the impact of this legislation, or this sleight of hand, and what impact it had on the sale of condos. And what we found out, it had 2 impacts. First of all, sales of condos, the percentage of the housing market that were work condos being built had dropped. That typical metropolitan area has about 24% of the built product is condominiums, and it had dropped to about 3 to 4% in the last several years. The second thing is that we found out that condos, to avoid and have the ability to survive litigation, would have to sell their condominiums at about $400,000 a unit. So the idea of attainable, or what we call worker housing, vaporized. If you wanted a home at an affordable price and you're a teacher or a firefighter, whatever, you would have to buy a single-family home. We also had we have a stranded asset, which was a $5 billion investment we all started making in 2004 called Fast Tracks, and there's one right across the street here. I hope all of you came down on that today. But the idea behind it is that we were going to have transit-oriented development, which is good planning and all that kind of stuff. And we saw an opportunity, this is my way of looking at it. You have an apartment there, you have 2 people living apart. They meet each other, they fall in love, they decide to make a household. And one of them works on transit and the other one doesn't. They can offload one of the cars. All of a sudden, they've got $800 a month more coming into their household, and that builds a corpus for their future life. And if some of them want to move off of transit and have children with a yard and single-family home, that they have a chance to build that corpus by not having to have what we refer to as the just-in-case card. We need to have the second card just in case we need it. So we thought this was a great idea, and was much of the way in which Fast Tracks was sold. The nature of the law and the practice of law around construction defects pretty much told us that we were never going to build any condos within the $250,000 to $325,000 range. So we decided there was something we should do about it. Now, to give you an idea of the damping of this, we went out and did a survey looking in Supreme Court documents and saying, what was the probability of a builder to be sued by a condo HOA from 2003 to 2010? No, 2003 to 2013, excuse me, 10 years. So we hired a lawyer, went through all the stuff at the Supreme Court, came back and said, well, 40% of the condos built in that 10-year period went through litigation. Another 40% had litigation started but settled. So 80% of all condos who came up in that period of time were engaged in some form of legal action on the part of HOA. Well, the solution was obviously all the builders are totally corrupt and incompetent. Okay? So we shouldn't trust any builder, and boy, we were right in this with the trial lawyers. We said, you bet, sue the hell out of those guys. No, we didn't. We didn't do that. But the reality is that it was astounding to us that 80% of all the units built were somehow so defective they required litigation. It was also interesting, we went and noticed where the trial lawyers' headquarters were, and surprise, surprise, most of them were in Arapahoe County, and I was stunned. Most of the litigation occurred in Arapahoe County, within driving distance of their headquarters. You know how many were done in Adams County? 0. So it was convenience, okay? Now we began to get pretty suspicious that this was really beyond what was anticipated under the laws that covered community-owned property. We put together a bill. We created the HOA, Homeownership Opportunity Alliance, a broad spectrum of folks of which you are a member. On the, I hate to say the far left, but on the cost of housing market, Habitat for Humanity, Housing Colorado. Very much advocates for the poor, for the folks who are struggling. And then on the other side, the home builders and our organization, Chambers of Commerce, economic development groups, you guys were kind of in the middle about how can we fix this. We put together a bill 2 years ago, 2 sessions ago, no, 3 sessions ago now, and had the votes, and it looked something like this. This is this last year's bill. This was the law as it was, binding under the bill that we proposed, binding arbitration with a 2/3 vote of the owners of units. Because what people sometimes lost is that even if your unit wasn't effective, if you're in litigation, you know it all too well, cloud on the title, inability to sell, inability to list, lack of information by unit owners that an action has even been taken. This was very much focused on consumerism on our part. Full disclosure, ability to resell, all the things that I just talked about. And we had the votes in both the House and the Senate. We got out of the House, we started in the Senate, and the Speaker of the Senate took the previous bill, 221, and put it in to what's called a kill committee, and the legislation died. So last year we put this one up, pretty much the same deal. By this time the Senate and the House had changed parties, so this one went into the House. We had the votes on the floor of the House. The bill was also put into what we call a kill committee and was killed, and so we were 0 for 2. The home builders of Colorado and city governments got really, really tired of this. And so the Metro Mayors Caucus, which is an association of all the mayors in the metropolitan area, asked us to find a way that locally they could change construction defects litigation. And under the Colorado Constitution, home rule cities have an incredible span of control of their future. But housing is not one of them. For almost all states in the country have housing as an issue of statewide importance. But almost all the home rule cities on the Front Range in the last 2 years have adopted ordinances. Denver, Lakewood, Aurora, Colorado Springs, Fort Collins, almost everyone, over 2 million people covered by home rule ordinances that essentially look like this. We don't know if that is legal or not. We've had a variety of people saying, no, housing is an issue of statewide importance, and people say, well, no, housing is an issue of local importance because home rule communities have the power under the Colorado Constitution. We have not had litigation against any of the cities yet. We have also not built any condos with it yet either because builders are afraid to engage again. So I have $180,000 sitting on my balance sheet right now for any city who gets sued by somebody on a construction defects related to their ordinance. That way the cities don't have to go to their citizens and ask them for money to defend their ordinance. We will fund a significant part of defending their ordinances. We now have, as I said, 2.4 million Coloradans are under ordinances, and we still can't build a condo. Last year, we sold 11,500 used condos. Any guess how many were built last year? 187, all over $400,000. This is not a solution. This is luxury condos where people can charge enough to be able to not fight off, but be able to absorb the cost of what is pretty much 100% predictable that they'll be in litigation. During the movement around the Front Range and the passage of these ordinances, and each one of them are different. We got a little bit better each time we put them together. Your organization was an active partner in that, testifying what you see on a day-to-day basis, what happens on the other side of a homeowner, a condo owner who is caught up in litigation and has to wait 2 to 3 years, even though they didn't want the litigation to occur and the impact on their lives. Folks who get transferred out of town and all of a sudden now they've got to hold 2 houses and they got to rent a condo because they can't sell it while the litigation goes forward. This year we tried something else, and I forgot about this little slide. Here's just a graph of, this was in 2005, and the green are the condos, and you can see what's happened in condo construction since 2005. Okay. Now, other states have faced the same issue. Nevada had probably the most lenient construction defects laws, and last session in their legislature, in 3 days they passed statewide legislation to essentially do what we recommended. Here's the sad stat. I went back and looked at since we started the HOA, how much real revenue, real income did the average person in Denver get, and how did that compare to rentals? Because the way in which people have moved is into the rental business because they can't afford a $350,000 median priced house. 3 years, net income after taxes, gain in income, real income, 2.6%. And here's what happened to rentals. So what we are doing is we are presenting ourselves with perhaps more of this problem. You've all seen this statistic. 40% of us are paying more than 30% of people who are renting more than 30% of their income for a rental. No corpus, no estate, just paying a landlord. This year we went through, we negotiated, and Ted Leidy, by the way, was on the negotiating team, tried to negotiate with the trial lawyers and with the folks who represent homeowners associations. We got very, very close, but it was obvious that we weren't holding very many cards, other than the threat of 2.4 million people and their cities going to court, and negotiations failed in the last 48 hours of the session. So we are still in the same place that we were 3 years ago. There are condos being built. They're all over $400,000. If you want to look down at Highlands Ranch. So we're going to find ourselves, to me, with a stranded asset, and that stranded asset is a $5 billion rail system. And the reason we're concerned about it is that we wanted diverse neighborhoods around transit. We wanted to have rentals and we wanted to have owner-occupied. And there's good reason for that. Owner-occupied units tend to be carefully scrutinized by the owners of those properties on any site. Rentals, you're dealing with younger people, people who don't have a stake in the neighborhood. You end up with homogeneous neighborhoods that aren't good for any of us. But we're not going to see anybody owning a unit on rail, unless you're in a really rich neighborhood that happens to have a rail stop. What's happening to us, we have now come to believe that housing is the #1 economic challenge that we face as a region. When you look at those percentages of being paid for rental, we find ourselves in a very, very difficult position. We have gone from being the #1 location for millennials to migrate to, depending upon which statistic you read, we're now either #6 or #10. These are the smartest people in the world. I know it's hard for you to believe, for those of us who are older, and they'll quickly tell you they're the smartest people in the world. But the reality of them, that's the workforce that everybody is chasing. That's the platinum demographic. And we were told in the front end that millennials aren't going to buy houses, and we had to spend a lot of time debunking that idea. Now we see it all the way. 8 out of 10 millennials are trying to buy a house, and they understand how the world works and how you build a corpus for your life. So right now we have my thanks to you for all you did to help us get there as far as we got. We had one strange thing happen in this that was unique, and that's what's called the Bellagio ruling. A developer here in the DTC had built a condo project, was sued by the HOA, and they had gone in and taken out the required agreement between the developer and the HOA to make a change in their rules, which is required right in the declaration. They took it out and then filed suit. He went in and said what they did is illegal. The district court said, nope, that's been the practice. HOAs can do whatever they want with the declaration on their own. And instead of saying, gee, I lost, he went to the appellate court. And the appellate court on May 5th of last year, waiting until the day after the legislature adjourned, came out with a ruling that said, no, there has to be a joint agreement between the HOA and the developer on how they're going to move forward on construction defects. And you cannot arbitrarily break a contract. It was one of the most well-written things I've ever read related to this topic. And it was obviously the Chief Justice of the Appellate Court was really upset with the way in which the practice of the law around construction defects has been going on in the last number of years in Metro Denver. That was, an appeal to that was filed to the Colorado Supreme Court. It's sitting there now for the last 6 or 7 months. We're hoping there'll be a ruling, but those of you who've been around Supreme Courts know they don't have to act. They can sit on as long as they want to. we don't know exactly. We're fairly confident that the Supreme Court was looking to see what was going to happen this year in the legislation. We also had another bill which would have taken construction defects out of existing common interest property law and would have had the judicial system operate what we call as a special master. It's kind of like a business court where you don't have any legislation. That just the judicial side of the House just says we're going to set up this unit to have experts on construction defects, and we would assign that. This was an idea of the sitting Chief Justice, and we'll assign that to a special master who's had a lot of experience in construction defects and would literally bring all the folks getting sued in a class action and say, and because of the knowledge base, say, okay, the plumbers you're in because it's a water issue, the drywallers you're out, architects you're in, and kind of decide who was actually potentially liable in the suit as opposed to all of them having to defend themselves. And then that special master would go into court in a bench trial and solve the issue at a bench trial. Still an appeal option available to the plaintiffs, but a much more efficient way of moving very quickly through these kinds of complaints. The only thing it needed was money, about 800 grand to run it. A bill went through at the end of the session, and it was killed in committee. So here we are. It's deja vu all over again. We're going to kind of lick our wounds, stop being angry, get over our depression, and a little Xanax maybe, and a couple glasses of wine, maybe we'll feel better. But we're going to come back to you again and say, let's try another avenue for this, and hope that Bellagio is either affirmed by the Supreme Court of the appellate decision, or tells us to come to the Supreme Court and get a Supreme Court ruling. So I mostly came to tell you where we are, but more than anything, I came to thank you for being just as good and great a partner as we could have had in this process. And I know it's your livelihood, but in my business, if there's not good housing and if there's not affordable housing for people, your economy just sucks. And just look at San Francisco. It's just people are emptying their office building because their employees can't get into a median family house of $787,000 today. So.